excited to have you in this conversation with us today. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Donna Rockwell, who is an expert on mindfulness as well as a psychotherapist, as well as doing a lot of work with people who are celebrities, actually. That's an interesting other part of your life and also plays into your work as a therapist, right? Anyhow, I'm really thrilled to have you here today. And I think this is going to be really valuable for our audience because I think mindfulness is such an important thing, especially at this time where everybody is struggling. So I'm really excited to have you here. Thank you.
So happy to be here. I love talking about mindfulness and I love being with you. So it's a perfect combination.
Yeah, for me too. I really am really glad. So I was wondering what you've seen in your practice in terms of how people are feeling these days, or what's come up for people that you're working with since this whole coronavirus and the lockdowns and all of that.
I think it's really thrown everyone into a tizzy. You know, we experience a sense of trauma when we are in unknown territory and we don't really know how to cope and navigate the environment in which we find ourselves. So that's what I find most of the people that I talk with regularly are going through, is how to get used to something so different and so new and so scary at the same time. There's no sense of when it might end. So people are having to live in this kind of space of uncertainty that we're not really trained for. And so that's one of the great highlights of mindfulness, is that all of that sitting, all of that time, all of that sort of inward focus prepares the mind for moments like this. I mean, we're in a big pandemic right now, but in a smaller way, just even in issues in our life, mindfulness teaches us how to stay present with what is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what is mindfulness, and especially what is mindfulness versus just meditation, because there's both and they overlap, but they are all different too.
Certainly. Well, mindfulness is sort of a state of mind, if you will. It's about what we were just discussing, the ability to stay steadfast in our own saddles in our life, irrespective of what's happening, irrespective of whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. But mindfulness is about just being able to say, interesting, and stay present with our contemporary in this moment experience. What we do when we get afraid, when our amygdala, which is the most reptilian part of our brain in the back, creates the fight or flight response, because we needed that in the day when we needed to run away from a lion in the jungle. But we're using that, you know, just when, in the old days, when the light wasn't turning green fast enough, you know, the tiny little things are getting our amygdala aimed and our fight and flight response activated. And we don't have any connection to our prefrontal cortex. So we are just like, you know, in a state of hypervigilance at all times. Mindfulness, really, if you translate it from the Sanskrit, it's really heartfulness. So it's about getting ourselves settled enough that we can actually come from our heart in the decisions that we make moment by moment by moment. Meditation, on the other hand, is a technique that we use to become more mindful. So there's all sorts of different types of meditations. There's transcendental meditation, there's Tibetan meditation, there's Hindu meditation, there's all kinds of meditation. You could also include gardening as a meditation, walking meditation, knitting would be meditation practice. Anything that helps us settle the mind so we're not in that fight or flight response, and come back to activation of our prefrontal cortex. So we're living from here, from our prefrontal cortex, from executive functioning and reasoning and wisdom mind, settled wisdom mind, versus, you know, fight or flight and running. So mindfulness is a state of mind that we work toward achieving and being able to manifest as often as possible in our daily lives. And meditation is a way to get there, one way.
Right, right. I appreciate that, because I was actually just talking with somebody that I'm working with about, dropping more into that heart space of coming at things from that perspective. And meditation is helping him get there. So it really is working. That's one of the practices he's adopted that is really helping with that, because he very much lives in his head, but in a way of analyzing all the time, not really from, his heart.
It's true, because if you think about that conversation we're having all day long with ourselves, they say, like, if we could see the transcript of our mind, we would think we'd gone crazy, because there's so many little fractions of thoughts and little ideas and things that we never would think we would think come up in our mind. But the idea is that we don't really have to pay attention or attach to thoughts particularly. And, I'm hoping we'll be able to do this meditation called the mountain meditation. But there's such a thing as sitting like a mountain and watching our thoughts pass across our landscape, the landscape of our mind, in the same way that a mountain just sits as the weather passes across its landscape. We will always have these thoughts. And the idea is not to get rid of them, but to learn how to dance with them, to learn how to invite them to sit down at the table. I was talking to a client yesterday about these thoughts that grab a hold of us and sort of drag us away. And I said, just think of it as like you're inviting them all to the Mad Tea Party, the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And they're all of these thoughts that are just sitting at the table with you. And none of them have any more value than any other thoughts. And that seemed to be helpful to him, to just sort of imagine all these thoughts sitting at the tea party table with the Mad Hatter, because it's really much more interesting and fun, really, to be able to sit in observance of all of this playing out rather than getting swept away by it. And we do choose every moment how we want to feel. Mindfulness is a way to get us to a place where in the moment we can make note of that choice and choose a behavior that we want versus one that's become a default or a habit.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like right now is such an important time for mindfulness, because I think, like you said, with the uncertainty, with the fear that is being aroused in all of us, and having to deal with a totally new situation, whether it's trying to share space to work or with our family, whether it's having kids at home that are usually in school and having to try to school them, so many different things, challenges people are having. It does seem like taking some time for mindfulness might be really important, especially in this time.
Absolutely true. It's very interesting, because they say the time to not start meditation practice is when things are completely crazy. And also it's contraindicated, really, to have to sit with your own mind if you are suffering from high levels of anxiety. So the idea is to calm the anxiety first and then be able to sit. But there are mindfulness practices that we can do to sort of calm the mind and not have to go into the kind of severe structure that a sitting meditation might bring to someone. Okay. So just like in the moment right now, if we're, thinking about COVID-19 and what our plans are going to be, and if the kids are going to be in school in the fall or aren't they, and what are we going to do about that? And what about the small business loan? And all of this, genuine concern is sweeping through our minds. What we can do is, and I really love this, and I'm so happy to share this, but the idea that when we take a pause in our cognitive flow, when we take a pause in our thought after thought after thought, the brain actually stops that particular firing of those neurons and those dendrites and that thought pattern. It stops. The brain takes a pause. It begins again after that pause, or with our breath for a second, even just that short a period of time. The brain has to reset and start firing again. That little pause, so giving the brain a chance to start again and refire, gives us all this energy and new creative power. If we just keep going down that same, excuse the expression, but rabbit hole, Mad Hatter, keep going down that same rabbit hole, we're just going to have the exact same reactions. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting change is the definition of crazy, So what can we do differently? If you take a pause and even close your eyes and just hold even your chest and your belly for a few inhalations and exhalations and feel the expanding of the chest and the belly. And then the contraction. And then the expansion as it fills with air. And the contraction. Just that little period of time, don't you feel completely different? Because the whole brain resets. So it's really just such a gift to have these little techniques that help us become mindful and thus able to sit with COVID-19, sit with this great unknown, sit in uncertainty.
Right.
Pema Chodron, I love her writing. She says it's important to establish a sense of ground and groundlessness, which sounds a little scary, but if you think about it, it's about really just being able, like a gyroscope resets itself as the angle changes. Well, we can do the same thing. If we have a mindful presence and a grounded seat, if you will, in our chair or wherever we find ourselves, and we have this sort of primordial self-confidence, they call it, like really believing in ourselves, I can get through this, I can figure this out, then our entire being can settle. And we are able then, to face what's in this moment.
Right. And I think that's so important. And I think, from that kind of calm place, we can make better decisions about how to deal with this new and challenging and more difficult situation, as opposed to when we're anxious and caught up in all the thoughts. I think it's really hard to make decisions about what to do or how to, meet these challenges that come up that are completely new because we're so anxious.
Right.
And so I like that idea. So the idea would be to calm yourself first before you might do a meditation practice, because we did get a question about how do I be mindful when I have extreme anxiety?
Right. Well, if you have really extreme anxiety, you should, call a doctor about that and a therapist and sort of see what can be done about that. If the anxiety is just slightly below off the charts, then, what's so interesting about that is in the Tibetan culture, there is something called mindful awareness practice. It's called shamatha vipassana. And shamana means calm abiding. And vipassana means insight. So as you're saying, the whole idea is that first we need to create the space of calm abiding, calmness, before we can discern any insight, any intelligence, any wisdom in this moment. So I think that's so helpful. I'm not supposed to just be able to figure everything out. I'm supposed to calm myself first and then allow myself to figure everything out. It's so interesting. Rather than seeking and trying to, push toward a solution, if we can become mindful, if we can first have a sense of calmness, then the answers actually can come to us in awareness and insight versus us struggling and suffering to find the answer.
I appreciate you going into that. That's really important.
Yes. If we can create the sense of calm, abiding in a sense of calmness, then we can have this sort of intelligence to know what to do. And what's so interesting to me, Lisa, is maybe it's because I'm a clinical psychologist, but at the end of the day, to me, like spirituality comes down to like brain physiology. It's how can we train our brains? How can we choose ourselves in the moment? How to decide what to do right now? What's for the highest good? And that comes through mindfulness, this sense of being settled. And it's all in our minds. Like if our amygdala is pumping, it's hard to have the spiritual groundedness to be awake, or be alert, or to stand. So to me, that feels so great because I know I'm living a fully spiritual life by trying to gain mastery over my own mental processes. So that I have a great example is that when I first started meditation practice, my husband and I were having an argument, you know, like all couples do. And I remember that in the middle of it, he was sitting in the chair like he normally does, and I was standing in my spot where I normally stand. We repeat so often, don't we? Patterns. And so in the middle of the argument, I thought to myself, I don't really feel like doing this anymore. I don't feel like arguing. And instead of just continuing with the argument and the fight, which I normally would have done, I just went over and sat in his lap. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I just don't feel like doing it anymore." And I realized in that moment that I had full control of anything that I chose to do in the moment. And I didn't have to follow that inner urge to keep fighting. That I could actually choose in this fresh new moment after a pause in thinking, what do I really want to do? And to make those choices.
I think that that's such a great example and so important for right now, because one of the things that they're finding is like domestic violence has increased, child abuse has increased with people having to be in their homes. And, you know, if people could take that pause, you could interrupt these cycles that get going. And I thought that was such a great example. I also completely agree with you. If somebody's got off the charts anxiety, you know, call a doctor, call a psychologist. They are available. You know, telehealth is available and happening. So even, you know, if you don't want to take the risk of seeing somebody in person, most people are working remotely, you know, anyways. Most of us are in lockdown. You know, it's fine. You can do that, and it's readily available. And I think that's so important, because I think sometimes people think, you know, well, I can't do that now. Well, you can actually, and you can start with somebody and really do some of that work. You know, my son is actually a clinical psychologist, and that's the work he does is with people who have anxiety. It's his specialty. So, I mean, you know, and he's seeing 40 patients a week in isolation, so in lockdown. You know what I mean? It's pretty interesting. You know, that it is. I just want people to know it's accessible. You know, even
Very
now.
much. Now more than
and I know
ever.
you're working, and I'm working, and seeing people, you know, and all in this modality.
And it's quite wonderful because the APA took off all of their requirements of telehealth, telemental health, and now people are able to get reimbursed, and they're making it so easy for people to really access help right now. So just to reach out, you know, even just Google it. In the local area, Psychology Today has lots of listings of local therapists, so it is available. And I did a lot of research around mindfulness with my doctoral students, looking at how mindfulness informed their being able to be in the room with clients and how it made them feel about themselves. And one thing they said was that it just made it so much easier just to be with what was going on and to relax into it, to not feel a sense of high anxiety. One of the students said, I stopped awfulizing, which is such a beautiful term. Like, she realized she was awfulizing. And also, another point I love is this idea of how harsh we are with ourselves in our own inner dialogue. The inner critic is so present with the whip, you know, just horrid. And it's so important for us. The main point of meditation practice and all of mindfulness is to learn how to become more gentle with ourselves. And once we can sit, one of the main reasons that we do sit in meditation is so we can hear that voice and come to know it intimately. And when we hear how cruel we are with ourselves, we just naturally lighten up. We naturally become more self-compassionate. And the big secret is, I know you know, is that we can really only be as compassionate with other people as we are with ourselves. And so this is for highly anxious people too, is to understand that the whole idea is for me to become more gentle with myself. And the more gentle we become, actually, the more our prefrontal cortex is activated rather than our amygdala, and the more we are naturally happy. You know, if you think about it, when we were little kids and running around on the lawn, I keep thinking about like how I used to go around in circles and I'd fall, and I used to have so much fun, and I couldn't do that anymore. You know, I've kind of lost that freedom of being. And mindfulness and meditation is intended to give us back that freedom of being so that we can have childlike wonder in the world and actually be happy even in the times of pandemic, by looking at and being able to see what we're grateful for. The sunshine, even all this time together. You know, couples can maybe look at the fact that they are stuck with each other, and that's a beautiful thing. I had a client tell me the other day, a woman in her mid-20s, she said her husband looked at her and they were having a little argument, and he said, "You're stuck with me." And she was upset about that. And I said, "No, he didn't say, I'm stuck with you. He said, you're stuck with me." You know, he was saying, I love you and you've got me, you know, so maybe we can learn how to listen a little better to each other also.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a really growing time for people in their relationship even. And, you know, sometimes I feel a little bit like it's like being on a vacation with my husband. I do really enjoy having more time, just running into each other all day. You know, sharing workspace, even though it can be difficult at moments. It's also really nice to have that time and the, you know, all that extra time where we're all rushing around. And I think one of the best things I've seen during this pandemic was a thing about how, you know, when we get back and we can, when this does, you know, when this does end, at least in this extreme form, and we can go back to our lives, what are the things we maybe don't want to go back to? You know, it's just a good time to reflect and to think about maybe we don't want to go back to all that busyness. And what were the things we really missed and care about? And what are the things that we really should let go?
You know, Pema Chodron also talks about this idea. She's just my favorite author, but you could find any of her books are fantastic. She's written so many. But she said, in life, we either choose to be more petty or more vast. And I remember hearing that and thinking, oh, I want to be more vast. That's what I'm going to dedicate my life to. And we have petty thoughts coming up. But again, if you are mindful, you can just notice the thought without attaching to it and let it go. Just like the mountain sits and watches the weather, we can watch our own thoughts come and go. So it's really
so important.
Self-mastery.
So one person said that they had heard that a recommendation for mindful hand washing. You know, what are some ways people can be more mindful during this time? Can even be mindful doing some of the activities people are doing a lot of, like watching TV or, you know, getting involved in things like that. I just wondered, you know, I like what you said about like knitting can be mindful. It doesn't have to be that you have this practice where you're just sitting in a dark room or something like that.
Right, because the main point really is just to come up with this calmness, to calm our physiology. You know, when the amygdala is going, that fight or flight response, our sympathetic nervous system is activated. So we, you know, it's supposed to be adrenaline filled. And what we're really trying to do right now is activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is calmness, peace, space. And we can do that. We did it just before, just by breathing in and out a few times, our breath and our breath, our chest and our belly. And just in a few seconds, we can do that. So those are the things that people can do right now, just this sort of mindfulness. The other thing I recommend is if you're in an area where you can get out and walk around to see a green leaf or nature, that is so organically healing. You know, we have to think about where we came from. You know, we were nomadic people at a point. It's in our DNA. We need to move around. We need to be in motion. And so I recommend that too. That's a mindful practice of just going for a walk with the family or a walk by yourself. And if you find that your mind is caught in worry, just simply feel your feet on the earth. See the piece of ground in front of you. Look at maybe the texture of the road I do that sometimes. Like there's different shapes in the road as you're stepping on it, to just really bring yourself back in the same way as this idea of mindful hand washing, that you're actually present. You can feel your fingers touching each other, and you can sort of like just actually be present. We just wash our hands and we go normally. But there's, this is a sensuous thing, and it's an embodied experience. It's a somatic form of meditation. So all these little gestures clear our mind and let it be able to experience more joy. So it's not hooked on worrying, So that's,
I think that's
mindful walking, brushing our teeth. They talk about that a lot, to actually feel the toothbrush. And it's so fantastic, Lisa, really, because all we have to do, the major alarm clock that we're lost in thought and we're either catastrophizing or over cognitizing, thinking of everything, is just the fact that we feel that way. The upset or the confusion or that little sort of uncomfortable feeling. Pema Chodron calls it dissatisfaction. You're just feeling some sense of dissatisfaction. That's the alarm clock that just tells you, oh, it's time to breathe. It's time to return to my breath. Become centered, some sense of calm abiding, and then I will feel so much better. So the thing that we are trying to get rid of the most is the thing that we need to welcome in and say, oh, this is the reminder to take a mind break.
Yeah, so important. Yeah, and I think it's those times we find ourselves trying to feel in that activated state is the time to take a breath, whether it's irritability or anger or frustration or whatever we might be experiencing, fear, to just take that break for a minute.
And it's mindful to go into another room. I mean, we're all living on top of each other now. So we need to have like house rules, and we need to understand each other. Like, I need private time now. I know with my husband, I give him plenty of time, and he's writing and he's doing his work. And then we come back together and it's really wonderful. Like the commute is 25 seconds from one room into the other, and so there is a tremendous amount of new opportunity now to experience things we haven't before. And we always feel better when we have gratitude or we feel grateful. We're home alone with the kids all day, and I hear a lot of angst from mothers who feel like they're not good enough, that they're not getting it right, that they have to do the schooling and this and that. I read a mindfulness exercise this morning online, which is that just take with your kids, take construction paper and make those little loops to make a chain. And on each of the loops, write down something that you're grateful for today. And then do it again tomorrow. And then they're all connected, and you have a chain of all the things that you're grateful for. And just being able to see them and keep them in mind is, number one, great for our sense of happiness and well-being. Secondarily, wonderful for this growing sense of connection between parent and child or family members. And there's just great opportunity to care about the things that are important, that are vast, that are meaningful to us now, and to take note of that which is petty and that which doesn't really matter anymore. I found a lot of people are calling family members and apologizing for past grievances, and want to apologize and make up and reconnect, because as a nomadic people from thousands and thousands of years ago, we need community. We need to move together. And it kind of like touches my heart when I think of that, because
I think that's so important. And I've seen that too, people calling people that they never talk to anymore, that they've cut out of their lives, and reconnecting. So in a way that, we could be more connected because we have time to be more mindful and to think about those things that are really important to us. And, those grievances never get us anywhere. We suffer with them more than the other person. And so when we do those acts of reaching out to someone or reconnecting, it's really helpful to us as well as to them. Just like with being mindful, if we take a mindful moment, even though that's a break maybe from our children or a partner or whatever, it's also a gift to them because we're going to come back a lot better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We come back refreshed, new, starting again, novel stimulation of our brain. We are worth being with. We have to think about, am I good company? We have a sort of responsibility to be good company and to gain mastery over our moods. We really can. But if we keep going, thoughts are like dominoes. Like once they start going, the whole narrative goes, and then we're just lost. But what mindfulness does is it helps us maybe discover that domino fall at the 8th domino rather than the 100th domino, so that we pull ourselves back quicker now. Sharon Salzberg, another magnificent meditation teacher, talks about it's all about the return. It's all about coming back to this moment, not about staying here. So every time we find ourselves lost or into a deep narrative, ruminating, coming back every time is the growth. It is the miracle, and it is the potential.
Yeah, I agree totally. Again, some of the other questions we've gotten. Is it productive to savor eating or any activity to the extent that it interferes with our schedules?
To savor?
Yes, to savor.
I think it's really important to savor everything. If you think about it, every moment of our precious existence can be savored. And every moment is sacred because they're limited, This is not a dress rehearsal. This is it. And so it kind of behooves us to see everything as sacred and to savor everything. Mindful people who drink too much alcohol, if they actually tasted every sip, when you take a sip of the wine and you taste, then you're going to drink less because you're drinking mindfully. The same thing is true for food. If we actually savor the bite, we're going to have less of it. So I think savoring is a really great way to look at it. And it's very spiritual. It's very spiritual because then you're actually present with every taste. And again, you see, we're back to our physiology. I wanted to mention that the first foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of the body. So our body speaks to us. If we're eating too much, it says you're eating too much. So the only thing we really need to do is start listening. The more deeply we can listen to ourselves, the more deeply we can listen and be present for other people. It really changes everything. So
right, and it's worth savoring even if it messes up your schedule a little bit.
Yes, definitely. And I think that we should be less attached to schedules and less attached to a lot of that stuff right now, because then that will give us the space to rediscover what's really important to us. I think we've moved from just making life a checklist to deciding what is meaningful to you right now.
Yeah, what really matters. Yeah, so much.
This has been a great restart for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. Somebody was asking about how can mindfulness help or stop overthinking and thinking you're not good enough.
Well, yeah, that's a really great point, and we looked at that because it's actually so pivotal to the whole story of mindfulness. Is we need to look at how we're talking to ourselves in our head. David Winnicott, who's a very famous philosopher and psychologist, came up with this notion of the good enough mother. Like if we are too good and we answer every need our child has, they're never going to learn how to be in this world. We're not going to be able to successfully launch this person. So it's really important that they see that and that they understand that. That's one of the main goals.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It's not about perfection. It's about being present.
Right.
And not so judging. I think partly of a mindfulness is not judging yourself, but having a different kind of relationship with yourself, of accepting yourself And then you can look at even some of the hard things that go on, but you aren't, judging and criticizing, and, that's all not very helpful actually in change processes.
And what got me turned around on that was I realized that the reason I didn't feel good enough was because Madison Avenue and the advertising agencies needed to make sure I didn't feel good enough, so that I had to go out and buy that shirt and those particular pair of shoes and that purse and that line of makeup and that shampoo, because if I did, then I would be good enough. And so we really need to take that back and know that we are already good enough. We're all children of God. We're all that kid running around on the lawn, falling over and giggling. And we can hold on to that in this life. So David Winnicott and his notion of the good enough mother, we're just supposed to be good enough. And being good enough is the best we could be. And if we could wrap our minds around that, it's our striving and our needing to be different, this self-improvement project, which is really so dangerous. You're already a child of God. You're perfect just the way you are. I remember, because I was tough on myself too. I remember someone saying, you're perfect in your imperfection. And I was like, oh, I'm done. I'm perfect in my imperfection. Cool, I try hard enough. So.
Yeah, definitely.
At the end of the day, they have the big Buddha is like, laughing. And they say, because we take everything so seriously, and we don't want to miss this, every moment's precious. Mm-hmm. And the more we can be in the present moment, the longer life will seem, and the less it will seem like it just rushed by, because we were present and present and present and present.
So we actually experienced our day rather than being lost in the future or the past or, obsessive thoughts or self-criticisms or whatever. We actually had each of these experiences in these moments.
Right, because the mind's natural tendency, because we need to survive, is to bemoan the past or catastrophize about the future. It is to be in the past or the future, so we can discern, what do I need to do right now? But that's not helpful all the time. So we need to be able to come back from the past and the future, because when we come to right here, right now, we discover nothing's wrong right now. Nothing's wrong right now. I can really be okay right now. So There's nothing wrong in the right now. I was teaching mindfulness to breast cancer survivors at a local hospital in Michigan. And the third week of the class, a grandmother came up to me and she said, you saved my life. Thank you so much. And I said, well, I didn't, but what are you talking about? And she said, before, when she was with her grandchildren, she would always be afraid she was going to die of cancer. And that was all she would think about. But after just taking 3 weeks of the class, she said that when she's with her grandchildren, she's with her grandchildren. And she can experience the love and the joy and the just existential rush of just being with them. And that was lost to her before. So she regained the capacity to really be present in the moment, where nothing was wrong, where what she was doing was experiencing love with her grandchildren.
Right. And she could have those moments that she wouldn't have if she's just worrying about dying. Instead of losing it. Yeah.
Our minds are always going to be in thought. So it's about how we come back, like Sharon Salzberg says. It's all about the return. And scientifically, Sarah Lazar, in her groundbreaking 2005 study, found that the brains of long-term meditators had thicker cortexes. And that is from that constant returning, the coming back to now, back to now. That's a whole new neuron and dendrite bundle that is created every time we come back. And then that can become a default. That's why we can come back after the 8th domino instead of the 100th. That's why in the middle of an argument, you can go sit on your husband's lap because you don't feel like doing it. You can actually.
Yeah, it's so important. And we can actually change our brains, literally with meditation. We now know from those kind of studies. And, have more that ability to come back, you know. I think some people feel like they're failing if they're not in the mindful state at every minute, but where nobody's going to be, you know. It's about the coming back that's important. Because I think some people get discouraged when they try to meditate that, oh, I got lost in my thoughts, or, oh, I got worried about this, or, oh, I felt this. And, you know, the thing is, all that's okay. And I'm in one of the times when we did an interview about meditation, he talked about it's like a feather to a balloon, the coming back. It's not about yanking yourself back. It's about gently moving back.
It's all about gentleness. And, you know, I think the ultimate goal is to have a love affair with life itself. You know, this is one dance we get to have however many times around the planet. And if we can have a love affair with that, with life, we've made it, you know, we've made it.
Yeah. And even with this new life that we're living right now, that's so unusual, you know, to love this time too and value it, you know, instead of just focusing on when is it going to be over, you know.
Yes, our minds will, of course, gravitate back to that. So like we've been saying through this webinar, it's about returning, coming back to now. And it's amazing how accomplished one feels after you're able to do that a lot. And when you are able to do that, then the pleasure center of your brain is stimulated because you've done it again. And that leads to the next time. And like you say, it's a light touch, like a feather to a balloon, very gently come back. We don't yank ourselves back. And when we see that we're being harsh in this internal dialogue, we can just simply say, interesting, I'm being harsh, rather than, oh, darn it, I'm being harsh again. Or why do I do that? No, it's, interesting, harshness. You simply take note, have a breath or two, and start your next moment. And wow, it's just incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And you're right, because beating ourselves up for beating ourselves up doesn't work at all. You know, getting into our critical inner voices and then getting critical about that instead of just, you know, sort of reflecting on them. Oh, I'm doing that again. You know, like you said, and being curious, you know, or interested, or not, you know, harsh about that either.
I decided that a while ago that you can't be anxious and curious at the same time. You know, if you're anxious, then you're ruminating on something. So if you're curious, it's an outward thing. You know, you want to know more about something. So I think that might be a clue. I use that with people oftentimes, is this idea of just switching from anxiety to curiosity, as you bring up. It's a wonderful intervention. Because then you have beginner's mind, you have childlike wonder again. What is this about? You know? And you know, you feel really good about a person when you're having a discussion with them and they own up to what they've done. And they're like, you know I do that. I want to look at that more closely and think, why do I get like that? And you just fall in love with a person when they're able to like be curious about what they've done rather than defensive, which is the first.
Right. Right. And you grow so much more from being curious about those things, you know, and instead of defensive. But that is our first human response, like you said.
And Ian Siegel, he says in one of his books on mindful therapy that the brain uses the mind to create itself. You know, it's like we're actually doing the work of changing how we see things by simply sitting and being present curiously with what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. We can change our minds and we can change our brains both by that practice.
Yes.
So somebody else asked about how, now that we're working from home, most of us, how is that, you know, the work-life balance can get lost where people are working all the time, especially because I think a lot of people have a lot of anxiety about financial issues right now. But how can mindfulness help people kind of strike that balance of, you know, work life and home life, you know, that coming back together with the people we're living with after work, you know?
Well, you know, we do better when we're more creative and we're more present. So just because we're working more doesn't mean we're working better. So I think it's important to have a schedule during this time, and like in the morning we're have creative minds, so do more of your creative work in the morning. Then take a break, have a cup of tea, so you have like you're building a ritual to your entire day. And then after you have a cup of tea, then you can have maybe answer emails, or don't do that first thing in the morning because you're wasting all your brilliance. But do that maybe after tea, just before lunch. And then after lunch, then be at lunch. And anytime your mind is going to what you did in the morning or what you need to do in the afternoon, just very gently, like a feather to a balloon, just walk your mind back to the avocado you're eating or the iced tea you're sipping, and fully taste it. Fully be present with that. And then in the afternoon, do what you need to do then. Go for a walk. Make sure you do that every single day that you can. Come back in. You have your dinner. You have your day. And it still makes sense to you. And you are feeling a sense of accomplishment at the end of it. That's what's most important. We'll feel a greater sense of accomplishment by having an ordered day like that than if we just worked from like 7 in the morning till 9:30 at night. We wouldn't have the sense of achievement that we do when we actually have a day like that. And it's much better for our minds and our minds.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that if we don't do our daily walk, I think, I'm never as happy. And I'm very lucky. I live on a ranch, so we can take a walk and be in nature really easily. And that makes all the difference, to do that. And we try to have it as a ritual at the end of each day.
And, in school, they don't teach us about what brain health is and what mind health is. And going for a walk, you can feel it every single time when you get out there, like, oh yeah, everything's okay, and you can like let things go. Those are all in the first foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of the body. It has intelligence. You can put your hand on your gut, where you have this like gut mind, and just say what's true right now. And the gut never lies to us. The other thing that's really important that we don't learn in school enough is we experience reality through our 5 senses, through what we smell and taste and see and touch and feel and hear. And that is a wonderful technique to returning to this present moment. When you find you're lost in thought or you're ruminating over an issue, simply see the green tree, taste the mint in your mouth, feel the breeze on your cheek, hear the birds. And before you know it, you're just transported back to now. So in Eastern meditation practices, using the 5 senses to return awareness to this moment right here, right now, is always used. That's the template. And we have that 24/7. We have our bodies. We can return. So the main goal is not to stay in the present moment. The main goal is to train ourselves to be able to watch our mind, watch thoughts come and go without attaching to them. They're not all that meaningful. And to be able to just come back to the present, to breathe into the present moment. The only reason that we concentrate on the breath is as a vehicle to return to now. Because we have to breathe. Yeah. So that's why it's used. It's not about breathing. It's about using it to clear out all those thoughts and come back to now. There's a lovely phrase in psychology. It's called meditation parts the veils of obscuration. So we are so obscure all the time, like we have all these thoughts and we can't even like see what's going on. But mindfulness like helps us part the veil of obscuration so we can see clearly and be present in this moment, just by clearing away thoughts. They're going to come rushing back, but the veil is parted and we're here. And in those glimpses,
we're here and experiencing.
Yes, we're re-energized.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so Donna, I was wondering if you could lead us in a mindfulness practice, just I thought that would be really important for our listeners to have this opportunity of your great wisdom and ability to do this well, to, if you're willing to share that with us.
Certainly. Well, one of my favorites, you saw one of them, which is just this breathing in and out. And we can do that anywhere. And I really recommend it many times during the day, and you'll see your entire life changes. The other one I like to do is called mountain meditation. And we've talked about that today. And it's really so helpful. And it really has changed everything for me in the context of meditation when I first learned about it. If you have a visualization, that always helps. Athletes visualize. So if we can picture something, it helps us to understand it and helps us to integrate it into our bodies physiologically and somatically. So we see that this image of the mountain, and the mountain is a very strong image. It's a very powerful iconography to think of that mountain just sitting. And as the mountain sits, we know this, weather through all 4 seasons passes across the landscape of the landscape of the mountain. So it's raining across the mountain's plains, it's snowing, there's sunlight there, heavy winds or very light puffs of air. And through all of the seasons and all of the weather, the mountain is able to simply sit. And as the mountain sits, it observes, it bears witness to all the weather passing over its landscape, season to season. In the same way, we can sit like a mountain and watch our minds, the weather of our minds, simply pass across our landscape, the landscape of our mind. So if we feel anger, we can simply just notice as the anger passes across the landscape of our mind and simply sit just like the mountain sits. We can feel a sense of hurt or pain from what someone did to us, or so we think. But we can sit just like the mountain and watch this feeling of pain, like a passing cloud, just pass across the landscape of our mind. So we can do that as a form of sitting meditation, and we'll do that now for a little less than a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll just sit and sit as though we are the mountain. And the mountain sits. And we watch the landscape of the mountain, of our mind, as thoughts pass across like weather. Our posture is strong in that our back is straight. We have a strong back and an open front. Our heart is open. And they say the spine is like a stack of golden coins just reaching straight up to heaven. There's a sense of dignity as we sit, like the mountain, the dignity of the mountain. Before we know it, we'll be feeling a feeling. Is it jealousy? Is it pride? As soon as we make note of that feeling or that thought, we simply notice it passing over the landscape of our mind, just like a passing cloud. Ah, interesting. As the mountain just sits and observes the weather, we too, we sit just like the mountain, without judgment. Simply bear witness. All the thoughts and feelings passing across the landscape of our mind. So let's just practice being a mountain, being strongly with dignity, sense of groundedness. Simply observe thoughts and feelings pass and the mind gets swept into thought. Simply return to being the mountain, bearing witness to the passing cloud. And when you're ready, you can very gently bring your awareness back into the room. Take a minute before you open your eyes. And open them with a soft focus. Give yourself time to reorient to the brain reaction. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Go into the space. Okay. You feel refreshed?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Really nice to take a second and really just drop into the experience. It's really, I think it really matters so much. And thank you so much for doing that. And I think this is an important meditation, especially for this time, the mountain meditation, because there are lots of thoughts and lots of inputs and, feelings getting stirred. But if you can just come back to that, like you said, just coming back, that exercise, it's almost like exercising a muscle, it seems like, that coming back, strengthening that. So important. And mountain meditation is a good one because you're very solid. All this can be going on, the chaos of the world, but you can be very solid and grounded yourself.
That's absolutely right. And that is the point of meditation practice. It's not to be morbid, but it's supposed to prepare you for death. This is not, this experience does end. So the whole idea is to actually wake up enough, not sleepwalk through life, but to be present in whatever moments we can be, and to notice when we're not, and then very gently, as you say, return. And it is a muscle. Malcolm Gladwell says 10,000 reps and you're an expert. So the more we can return and return and return, we should feel good about that because we're becoming more experts at being in the moment, returning to the moment. And just to really end so we don't get overly ambitious, I met with Judy Leek, who's a great meditation teacher and works on death and dying. That's the title of her book. I asked her, after 30 years of meditating, like, how do you feel? And she said, like a beginning. So every meditation is a new beginning. and a new
Yeah.
to experience.
Yeah. I remember when I did an interview with John Kabat-Zinn, he said, it's not whether there's life after death, it's this life before death. Are you actually experiencing the life you have? This, like you said, it's not a dress rehearsal, that we're here. Let's experience it. And let's not give up these moments during this pandemic as just something to get through. Let's experience them. This is part of our lives and part of everybody who, is on the planet right now. It's part of their lives. And that's okay. We can have these moments too.
We're, living through a time in human history on this planet. It will be written about in history books long after we're gone, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And what's so extraordinary is that we are living through it, and we can be present to it. We can stay present to it. And knowing that we are getting through it and that we can get through it gives us such a sense of inner confidence and knowing and meaning and purpose. There's purpose in what we're going through now. We can all connect and really feel the love that's underneath all of our feelings all the time anyway. And it breaks through in times of hardship.
Yeah. Especially if you slow down and let it, you'll break through. And I think this has been such an important time, and I really appreciate this conversation, because I really think it'll help our listeners, drop into those moments and have these very precious moments that we have even now. And I think you gave people a lot of great techniques for doing that. And I really appreciate it, Donna. And it's really just a pleasure for me to spend the time with you and get to drop into my own experience with that mountain meditation. So I appreciate it.
Wonderful, Lisa. It's so great to see you. And thank you for inviting me, and the best of luck with the rest of your series. Such a great
Thanks.
story.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.